system, receiving another box. When he showed the contents of this one of the viewers asked why there were always these stones here. He assumed that these stones were useless, and someone noted that he had seen this somewhere before. Jeju also received a bag of normal rank coins, and after receiving these coins, they should have automatically been added to the account. In addition, he received a rare rank spatial backpack, and it was an invention of the genius magic engineer Rafix, which could withstand a maximum weight of 500 kilograms. Jeju thought that the coins were a standard reward, so it was to be expected. But the backpack was something that only lucky people got, so it was not bad. He was sure that the viewers would definitely be satisfied, and looking at the items received, the user The Love asked if it was true that this was a good thing. Realizing that the backpack could withstand 500 kilograms, one of the users said that it was normal, and another pointed out that in his time, they would tear things apart and tie them together to make a semblance of a bag. That is why this person was outraged that Jeju simply received a backpack. The protagonist, when taking out the last stone, hid it in his palm, since he knew that it was a mana stone, and assumed that it would be better if he did not show the description of this item on the stream. The mana stones would be useful when they reached the 10th floor, but each mana stone had a different structure, so it was too free to eat everything. Jeju closed his eyes and put the stone in his backpack, and then, throwing it over his shoulder, he smiled, deciding that he needed to ask another topic of conversation before the audience started talking about the mana stone. That was why he decided to look at the hidden reward, and when he chose this position, a small stone began to appear, and before Jeju had caught the reward, someone in the audience pointed out to others how careless he was about rare items. Someone added that some might think that the protagonist was laughing at the poor like that. Jeju, meanwhile, caught the stone and looked at it in amazement, and then a system window appeared nearby, notifying that it was a heroic rank upgrade rune. This rune raised the rank of the item by 1 level, and the final rank could not be higher than the rank of the rune itself. Noticing this description, someone exclaimed that this was very cool, suggesting that it was worthy of being a hidden reward. One of the viewers indignantly asked, "Who was it that said that Jeju overdid it again for nothing?" The protagonist declared with a smile that it was a good thing, and decided that he would keep it for now. He began to put it in his backpack, and one of the users advised him to use it on his axe. Others found it funny that this person was suggesting that Jeju use an item worth 20,000 coins to level up a weapon worth 250 coins. Drawing attention to this, someone said that there were rats in the chat, and the protagonist suddenly froze, shuddering, as his vision began to blur. He bowed his head, covered his face with his hand and announced that he was feeling unwell, and the audience advised him to collect the rewards and quickly move on to the next floor, since he had lost a lot of blood. They hurried him, explaining that all wounds heal once a person moves to the next floor. One of the viewers also noted that the reward for subscribers can be opened at any time, so he advised Jeju to just go to the portal. The protagonist decided that he would move on to the next reward, and when he turned his attention back to the system, choosing a reward, it congratulated him on receiving 100 subscribers, noting that due to his high potential, he would receive a blessing, and he could choose it from the options below. The system provided him with a blessing of health, a blessing of strength, a blessing of agility, a blessing of mana, and a blessing of luck. Some suggested that the protagonist take health, some did not understand this suggestion and said that any person in their right mind would take strength. Some people noted that given Jeju's fighting style, agility would be most useful to him, but some wrote that the tower was all about items, so they said that luck would rule. The protagonist thought that blessings were some kind of passive skills that greatly increased the related stats. Of all these blessings, mana helped mages and magic engineers the most, but since it played a small role at the very beginning, no one talked about it in the chat. However, Jeju had already made his decision and confirmed the blessing he chose, saying that he would choose this one. He closed his eyes, accepting the light that appeared around his body, and one of the users exclaimed that it was useless unless Jeju wanted to be a mage. Many were sure that he had not made the best choice, noting that he never listens to people. The main character continued to smile, thinking that unlike mages and knights, who are strong from the very beginning, the path of magic engineers is filled with obstacles and mysteries. No matter how hard a person tried, the skills of the class were not applicable everywhere, so most people regretted choosing this class. Usually, magic engineers were perceived as non-combat units, support for the team, or simply creators. He imagined a person who was selling one of the items he created at a discount with tears in his eyes. However, Jeju smiled and thought with confidence that he himself was only at the very beginning, and he clearly remembered the guy from the video. He remembered some of the scenes he had seen, as well as the man who put his palm forward using modified armor, and from this, a powerful explosion was heard towards the monsters. It was a genius magic engineer on the battlefield, and Jeju, closing his eyes in delight, mentally exclaimed that real men know that explosions are cool. Although he would never be able to create his own magic weapon like that genius from America, the protagonist was not upset. He asked the Pope to come to him and caught the monster that jumped into his arms. He could try to repeat and imitate that man's invention with due diligence and, holding the Pope to himself, he closed his eyes, and then noticed that they ate the dragon turtle with pleasure. He looked at the place where only the turtle's body lay, no longer hidden under the shell. Also noticing this, one of the spectators admitted that for the first time he felt sorry for the dragon turtle. People did not understand how these small creatures could even fit, and Jeju, sighing, decided that it was time for them to go, since he was already at his limit. Many began to hurry him, since he almost fainted, and promised that after the portal he would feel better. Jeju entered the portal, finding himself on the next floor, and kneading his palm, he sighed, noticing that he was already much better. All of his wounds had indeed disappeared, and he was delighted to see this. Someone asked for the others to look at Jeju with a bit of displeasure, and another user said that he had started watching him from the first floor, but he had revealed his true self on the second floor. The protagonist turned around in amazement, noticing the system window that had appeared, warning that the third floor's trial was about to begin. It was the garden of the forgotten ancient god, and the guardians who were in a dream were about to conduct the trial. Jeju had to win the battle against the guardians, and there were less than 10 minutes left before the trial began. The system also warned him to be careful, because if he left the territory of the garden of the forgotten ancient god, he would be trapped on the third floor forever. Thoughtfully holding his chin, Jeju thought that the first and second floors were much more difficult than he had seen in the video, but the third floor was not much different. Viewers noticed that the description was quite accurate, and many noted that the first and second floors were simply weeding out the weak. The third floor was where things really started, and Jeju crossed his arms and wondered what would happen if the third floor was of the same difficulty. But at that moment a portal appeared, and Yun Suk came out, thanking the viewer Cloud for donating 10 coins. He announced that he had successfully entered the third floor, and Jeju looked at Suk with a wary frown, not understanding if this was possible. Finally noticing him, Suk was also surprised, and the protagonist wondered if it was the same difficulty because the challenge required teamwork. At this time, Suk finally started to speak and asked in confusion, was it really a person? Jeju continued to think about the difficulty of the challenge, and Suk, holding his hand to his neck, cried out, and the protagonist focused on him, and he, holding his palm forward, greeted him. Jeju noted that judging by how Suk was shaking, it can be assumed that the second floor was not easy for him. Also holding out his palm, he greeted him in return, and the butts on his shoulders trembled warily. When they shook hands, Suk suddenly moved closer to Jeju, and then, crying, asked if it was true that he was also a streamer? Jeju confirmed it, and asked if it was really hard for Suk. Realizing his behavior, he pulled away from him, raising his hands and apologizing, but the protagonist thought that Suk's reaction was quite justified, because it was probably the first time he met a person in the tower. Wiping away the tears that were streaming from his eyes, Suk admitted that he didn't have much experience, and people in the chat pointed out that this was a normal reaction for a newbie. Someone suggested that Jeju was a robot, but someone answered that he was just showing off, calling him an arrogant newbie. Having calmed down a little, Suk, saying his name, asked what the protagonist's name was. He introduced himself in response, holding his hand on his neck, and repeating his name. Suk, closing his eyes, laughed, admitting that it was an interesting name. Jeju replied that he was often told that, and Suk asked again about his name, but was distracted, looking at his own system window that appeared next to him. He finally apologized, got the protagonist's attention, and asked if it was true that the things on his shoulders and head were popo. Jeju flinched in surprise, and then smiled, picked up one of the popo from his shoulder, and confirmed that it was indeed so, asking if the viewers had enlightened Suk. Leaning toward the popo, he smiled and noted that it was very cute, and confirmed Jeju's guess, admitting that the viewers were going crazy, and also kept asking what the popo were doing there. The protagonist, returning the popo to his shoulder, announced that it just so happened that he had been with them since the first floor. User The Love, laughing, asked what he meant by it just so happened. Someone noted that the first floor was Jeju's personal dark episode, and another user agreed with this, as he was sure that he himself would have definitely lost his head if he had met the Popa on the first floor. Suk wanted to say what they should do in such a case, but the ground suddenly shook, and Jeju and Suk flinched, trying to keep their balance. Two huge stone statues suddenly appeared in front of them, and the protagonist suggested that they finish their sentence later, while Suk froze in fear, looking at the opponents who appeared in horror. One of the statues suddenly put a spear on the ground, leaning on it, and a statue holding a shield appeared behind, while the system announced that the time until the test was over. Jeju guessed that if the third floor had the same difficulty, then the weaknesses of the defenders would be the same. He took out his own weapon from his backpack, warily looking at the statues, and Suk, still frozen in fear, covered in sweat and did nothing. Jeju remembered that the statues of the defenders guarded the third floor, and people often said that the real test began here. On the easy difficulty there would be one statue, on the medium difficulty there would be two statues, and on the hard difficulty there would be two statues, and Jeju gripped the handle of his axe tighter, frowning and pursing his lips, mentally noting that if he didn't defeat the two statues at the same time, they would come to life. He ran forward, while the statue holding the shield also came forward, protecting its partner with its shield. The statue's eyes glowed a menacing red, and realizing that it had started, one of the users laughed and asked if it was true that many people were dying here. Another person confirmed this, explaining that streamers were getting confused and dying. Some people found this funny, and while laughing, viewers noted that it was obvious that the shield was for defense, and the spear was for attack. However, someone also pointed out that the shield seemed more intimidating. The statue holding the spear swung it, striking, and the force of it was so great that the shockwave spread in different directions, raising clouds of dust, and unable to stay on his feet, Suk fell and, closing his eyes, screamed, asking what kind of power do these monsters have? Suddenly, he shuddered, looking around in fear, and asked where the protagonist was. One of the users assumed that the streamer died, but another explained to him that the stream would have turned off if Jeju died. As the dust raised by the impact began to dissipate, viewers noticed the protagonist running towards the statues. Also noticing him, the statue holding the shield began to lower it to flatten Jeju, and already quite quickly, the defender lowered the shield, and from this impact, clouds of dust rose into the air again. Noticing this, Suk excitedly shouted Jeju's name, and the statue raised its shield, but there was no one in the place where he came here, and Jeju suddenly appeared behind the statue and grabbed his axe with his palms tighter, preparing to strike. He pushed off the ground with his feet, flying into the air, and his body began to exude a magical aura, and one of the users noticed that Jeju was shining even brighter than it was on the second floor. Another viewer also thought so, and the protagonist, finding himself next to the statue's leg, delivered a powerful blow, cutting off this one's leg. Noticing the statue that lost its balance and began to fall, Suk cried out in amazement, but the second statue stretched out its hand forward, catching its comrade, and the viewers were amazed, and the user the love said that this was the right thing to do. Jeju, watching his opponents closely, realized that there was no time, because the statue was alive again if nothing was done to the second statue. He could not let them revive and took a deep breath, and then ran forward very quickly, approaching the second statue. He struck, and calling it Lebowski, one of the viewers asked, "What's the plan?" Another user called it a dirty trick that Jeju hit the leg of someone who was helping his comrade, and another person, remembering that the main character was the host of the stream, asked why he was acting like a villain. Jeju, meanwhile, noticed that he had not managed to cut off the leg of the other statue with one blow, and realizing that he had to act again, he swung again, clenching his jaws from the effort, and this time both statues lost their balance and fell to the ground. From this, a large cloud of dust rose into the air, and when it dissipated, everyone noticed the remaining severed part of the leg. Jeju stared at his opponents intently, and jumped off the severed part, and noticing him, Suk ran closer, excitedly shouting his name. Looking at the fallen statues in horror, he stuttered, "Who is Jeju?" He smiled, not knowing what to answer, and one of the viewers suddenly wrote that he remembered that this test was supposed to be for two, and laughed. Another user noted that Jeju took all the laurels for himself, and suddenly, looking at one statue, the protagonist shuddered, noticing that the eyes of this one glowed red again. Frowning, he warned Suk to be more careful, but he continued to stand in place, and when he turned around, he still did not understand what happened, and asked again in confusion. Finally noticing a huge spear flying towards him at high speed, he froze in shock, and Jeju, stretching out his palm towards him, ordered him to duck already, and the next moment the spear flew past the place where they were and pierced the ground further, causing a powerful explosion. However, Jeju and Suk were not injured, as the protagonist managed to jump up to Suk in time and knock him to the ground. Turning around, he noticed that the statues began to rise, and one of the users asked in shock, "What was this?" He told Jeju to just kill these monsters already, and the statues looked at the protagonist in fury, and he noted that no one could have known that these protectors would throw a spear. He realized that it was not enough to just knock over these statues, and while he was thinking, Suk froze in fear, covered in sweat from excitement. Jeju decided that he had to finish these statues and got into a fighting stance, holding his axe at the ready. He looked at the statues ready to fight and frowned, and many admired him for showing his strength, and also called him very cool. Jeju ran forward and, reaching one statue, he kicked off the ground, jumping onto the statue's previously severed leg. He stopped in front of the defender holding a shield in front of him and got into a position where he could run faster, then kicked off the ground with his feet and, reaching the edge of the severed leg, he jumped up, aiming at the statue that was watching him in confusion. He raised the axe above his head, swung it, and with one blow, split the statue in two. The shards of stone flew down, the upper part of the statue fell to the ground, and the second defender, stretching out his hand forward, tried to hit Jeju, but he jumped down in time, dodging this blow. However, the statue was already preparing to hit him with its second hand, and realizing that he would not be able to dodge, Jeju asked himself what he should do. He realized that he did not have time to think, and frowned, noticing that the second statue was already enveloped in shining light. He knew that before the broken statue was revived, he needed to finish off the second monster, and frowning, he pressed his lips tighter, swung his axe, then jumped up and struck the hand of the second statue. Because of this, part of the hand broke off, and the other part cracked badly, and the injured statue began to fall down, and from above it was pressed down by the remains of the body of the other statue. Jeju landed carefully to the side, not looking back or paying attention to the statue behind him falling. The impact cracked the neck of the second statue, the eyes of this one went out, and the system announced that the trial had been passed. After that, user Red Ocean sponsored Jeju for 5 coins, and user Drakenskigo sponsored him for 20 coins. Several other users also sponsored the protagonist, and he, holding his neck with his hand, covered his eyes and thought that he could continue with the old strategy, that is, destroying the red eyes, which were the weak point of the defenders. However, it was enough for him to simply destroy the statues in order to pass the floor, and with a smile, he asked if it was true that they had successfully cleared the floor. He asked if he had made the audience wait too long. Echoing his question, one user wrote that his noodles hadn't even had time to cook, someone else noted that it was very cool, and someone else admitted that he was expecting a newbie like Jeju. Looking around, the protagonist was surprised to see that the portal had not appeared, and one viewer wrote that this was the only time Jeju looked like a real newbie. User The Love explained that the portal was in front of the protagonist, telling him to go in, and another person noted that if you look at Jeju's battles, it would seem like he was a professional player, but he didn't even know where the portals were. The protagonist thought that he was already too good at fighting, so he decided to pretend that he didn't know. Suddenly, Suk asked him to wait, holding out his hand after him, and Jeju turned around, asking what happened. Suk closed his eyes and asked if they could talk for a while. The protagonist thought tiredly that he had already spent a lot of time on the 3rd floor, and that was why he just wanted to go up quickly. Smiling, he apologized to Suk, noting that maybe they could talk another time, and declaring that they would have another chance, he ran away. Looking after him in shock, Suk realized that Jeju had ditched him. Meanwhile, the protagonist climbed the stairs, noticing a pedestal with a scroll on it, and opening it, he read that it was written about someone expecting their destruction. These people heard the cries of starving people, and the spirits of fallen soldiers wandered around the empire. Jeju imagined the streets with dead people lying on them, as well as houses engulfed in flames. It was the year 957 of the Astraud Empire, and the mad ruler triumphantly proclaimed the beheading of a young general who had returned from the war. The reason for this was simple: the general did not listen and acted arbitrarily, and because of this, he was executed. The one who wrote the words on the scroll addressed the wanderer, noting that if he reads this text, he should never anger the emperor. The spectators, who also read this text, did not understand what it even meant, but assumed that it could at least help. Jeju closed his eyes, thinking that it was obvious that he should not understand the meaning of this text now, but it was a hint to pass the 5th floor. Suddenly he shuddered, turning around, because he noticed a portal opened on the side of him. But first, he decided to check the rewards and open the system window, and the users hurried him, but noticed that the difficulty of this trial was normal, so the reward would be bad. Jeju, having received a gift box, opened it and asked himself in amazement, is the reward really only a bag of coins? Some of the viewers laughed, noting that he thought so, and some said that it was nonsense, not a reward. The users assumed that the protagonist had received too much on the previous floors, and this was something ordinary. Taking the coins in his hand, Jeju asked himself, is this really just like that? He remembered that on high difficulty, they gave 3 items, but suddenly shuddered in shock, frowning, as the system window that appeared next to him announced that he had received a bag of 5,000 coins of the usual rank, and after receiving this, the coins would be automatically added to the account. Noticing this, the users were also surprised that Jeju received 5,000 coins for the 3rd floor. Smiling, the protagonist winked, showing an approving gesture, and he realized that he was worried in vain about the fact that he only had 1 reward. One of the viewers disappointedly noted that he had just laughed, and was already roaring with envy. Jeju looked at the other system window, noticing that the active viewers were 211, the subscribers were 138, and the coins earned were 5608. Holding his chin with his hand, he assumed that the increase in viewers was most likely due to the cross-stream with Suk. He then turned his attention to the coins, figuring that if there were only coins on the 5th floor, then he would learn more about magical engineering. Suddenly, one of the users asked if the popo had become too quiet after the 2nd floor. Another person reminded him that Jeju was their owner and advised him to pay attention. Another viewer agreed with the previous users, admitting that he thought the popo had died. The protagonist asked again in confusion, turning around, noticing that the popo were lying on the ground, trembling, and it was difficult for these creatures to even speak. Jeju crouched down next to the popo, stuttering with excitement as he asked if they were sick. The popoi screamed again, covering their eyes, and turning to the viewers, the protagonist asked if any of them knew why the popoi were acting like this. One of the people replied that if they knew, they wouldn't be watching Jeju's stream right now, and another viewer added that the protagonist was the first person to tame the popoi. Suddenly, one of the users suggested that the popoi might be hungry, and Jeju shuddered, remembering that the popoi had eaten an entire shell on the 2nd floor. He replayed this image in his mind and decided to check something just in case, and putting his hand in his backpack, took out a mana stone, which the popoi handed over. However, the creatures turned away from this, and closing his eyes, Jeju sighed, putting his hand to his forehead, and admitted that he did not think it was hunger. But suddenly the system notified him that the user The Love had sponsored him for 20 coins, and she also sent a voice message advising him to try to get to the 5th floor first. Jeju thanked The Love, and then asked in surprise if she really advised him to go to the 5th floor? One of the users assumed that The Love was talking about this very thing, and another person agreed with him, and someone admitted that he was irritated by such a vague wording in the chat. Jeju suddenly remembered that there was someone on that floor who could look at the popoi, and picking up the creatures in his arms, he announced that in that case he would run to the 4th floor as soon as possible if the babies were so unwell. But he was suddenly distracted when he heard Suk calling out to him. He ran up the stairs, squinting from fatigue, and asked Jeju to wait. Breathing heavily, he noted that he only needed a minute, and the protagonist announced that he had an emergency here, so he wanted to say something, but stopping next to them, he knew that he getting on his nerves, but announced that he just thought he should thank Jeju. He bowed, saying that he only got through this floor thanks to him. Smiling, he thanked him again, and the protagonist watched him in surprise, and then, closing his eyes, he calmed down, and smiling, said kindly that he was always happy to help, noting that they would see each other again. Suk happily agreed to this, and Jeju, turning around, began to go into the portal, suggesting in his mind that they meet again someday. After passing through the portal, he found himself on another floor, and the system notified him that the 4th floor's trial was about to begin, announcing that it was a temple sealed with a rune, and Jeju needed to break the seal and open the door. There were 5 hours, 59 minutes, and 49 seconds left until the trial ended, and the system warned the protagonist to be careful, because if he failed to break the seal, he would be trapped on the 4th floor forever. Jeju looked at this notification in horror, thinking that it was certainly written more gently, but in essence, it meant that he would die. He understood that even if he spent coins on food, it would not last long, and staying on the floor meant death. He closed the system window, walking closer to the wall where runes were inscribed on the stones. He, looking at another wall where crystals were visible, inlaid into the stones, noted that there were most likely about 1,000 crystals for high difficulty. Some spectators laughed, realizing that Jeju had ended up in a place of intelligence tests. Someone assumed that 6 hours would be enough to solve the riddle, but one of the spectators said that this was not so, confident that his brain would have floated earlier. The protagonist decided to check what the store would offer him, and opened the corresponding system window, seeing a notification that began adjusting offers according to the user's floor. Jeju thought that, unlike the other floors, the goods on the 4th floor offered a wide variety of food and all sorts of vital items to attract the user instead of weapons and protection. The 4th floor was a battle against time, and Jeju knew that if he relaxed too much due to the availability of food and the amount of time, he would definitely get stuck here and sign his own death warrant. He put his hand on his chin and then closed his eyes, declaring that he didn't really need any of it right now, so he decided not to spend the coins. He also said that he didn't have that much, and upon hearing his words, one user asked if he had just ignored the chicken. Another person admitted that he had just looked at it and decided to order it, and another viewer exclaimed that Jeju could do too much and suggested that they do a live stream of eating food. The main character declared that he wanted to save those coins for later, and reminded everyone that his little ones were sick. He looked at the buttocks, which still looked painful, and the viewers remembered this, and one user stood up for Jeju, ordering the others to stop seducing him. Another user pointed out that the main character affectionately calls the buttocks babies. Approaching the crystals, Jeju thoughtfully noted that on the 4th floor, you need to study the inscriptions on the crystals in order to understand the pattern and find the right color. The crystals changed color as soon as you touched them, and this was the main rule. He touched the crystal, which lit up red, and squinting his eyes, he noted a little displeasedly that it was hard to think that this was causing him difficulty. He continued to press the crystals, thinking that a crystal with such a symbol had a different order of colors. At first, his brain melted from trying to remember all these inscriptions that he had never seen before, but in the end, he came to the conclusion that he replaced the letters with numbers, and it was easier to remember. He was frowning hard as he copied the combinations into his notebook, and now, as he pressed another crystal, he realized that it was going to get harder from here on out. The really annoying part about this floor was that some crystals would spontaneously change color. As soon as he thought about it, he noticed that one crystal actually did change color, and someone in the audience admitted that they were shaking every time they watched the 4th floor. Another user asked if it was true that the 4th floor challenge was 1,000 crystals. Another person confirmed that it was, saying that you just need to press anything and pray that it works. Jeju thought that this was just an annoying Rubik's Cube for him to solve. He started pressing the crystals, thinking that he needed to go from the 1st to the 3rd, white to the 4th, 17th, 9th and back to the 1st again. Watching his actions, someone assumed that he really went to click on random stones and laughed, and another viewer warned that Jeju should not do that. Someone wrote that the protagonist started playing a rhythm game instead of taking an intelligence test. After a while, Jeju stopped, looking at a row of crystals that lit up with the same color. The viewers were amazed that it worked and realized that he was acting according to a certain plan, asking in shock how this was possible. The protagonist again raised questions in them, and he thought that the first stage was assembled, and was glad that everything was going